On today's episode of Love, Happiness, and Success for Therapists, I could not be more excited than introduce you to a very special organization that is near and dear to my heart and that may become near and dear to yours as well after you learn more about it. The organization is called A Home Within, and their mission is to connect young people aging out of the foster care system with a pro bono therapist who is able to maintain a positive, healthy, long-term relationship with them for as long as they need. We're going to talk about why this is so important and the just amazing impact that this can have on your career and on the world with the Chief Operating Director of A Home Within, Candice Simonds. And Candice, thank you so much, first of all, just for joining me today and sharing your mission with our audience. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Lisa, for having me. I'm happy to be here, especially given that this is the 30th anniversary of A Home Within's mission. And so we're celebrating. It's a big year for us. We have big goals to invite 300 new volunteers this year.
Really?
Yes, into the opportunity. So when you reached out to us, I was so happy to get on and share with your community about the opportunities at A Home Within.
Yeah, that is fantastic. I didn't even know that. Well, first of all, congratulations on a 30-year anniversary, like Mazel Tov. That's a big one. And what a happy convergence. I really had no idea that you guys were doing a drive when I reached out to you. I got in touch because I'm just such a huge fan of what you guys do. So anyway, maybe we could just start there. I mean, I would love it if you could spend just a couple of minutes telling our listener here a little bit more about what your mission is and why it's important. And I would also personally love to hear, if you're open to sharing, like how you became involved in this mission, if that's okay. Yeah.
Sure. What I love about A Home Within's mission and the organization is that it's completely relational. So it started off about 30 years ago with just a handful of psychotherapists in San Francisco. And they really were sitting around a round table and they said, what can we do to solve this problem of foster youth not having a permanent relationship in their life? Because of often the fiscal and administrative constraints around providing therapy to this population makes it almost impossible to provide a continuous relationship. Either they move out of the area, the relationship ends, either the fiscal resource decides that's it, you've had all the sessions we're going to pay for.
You're 18, you're cut off.
That's right. Or maybe you're just not acute enough to even qualify to have a therapist. So they sat around the table and they said, what can we do?
Yeah.
And they were all friends, eating cheese and probably enjoying some red wine. And they came up with this great idea. And since then, 30 years later, it has spread this infectious, beautiful idea around how local communities and friends can invite each other into community to solve a problem creatively and I would say joyfully. It's really the story of A Home Within, and 20 chapters later, from San Francisco to New York City, we have communities all around the country who are really committed to their relationship to solving problems in community. So that kind of full circle brings me to me, one of my dear friends who I met in my 20s, and I like to think that I'm in my 20s, but I'm not.
As do I, Candice. Yeah, but
I met her when we first started our careers at a nonprofit agency. She just finished grad school. Yada, yada, yada. We became really good friends. And it's interesting because I always say I met her before I was married. I met her before I became a mom. And so we full circle connected through A Home Within. We stayed in touch, but she had always been a member of A Home Within. She worked very closely with the founder, Tony Heineman, as a student and as a researcher with Tony. And so, over our own cheese and wine, she said, "Hey,
You know.
do you want to join A Home Within?" And so the rest is history. And that story can be echoed throughout A Home Within.
Yeah.
It really is a place that holds therapists together in community. And it allows therapists, of course, to grow over time, because what we could do in our 20s looks a little different now that we're not in our 20s. And so these relationships have been a thread. And so the community holds the therapist and the relationship.
Yeah, that is wonderful. Well, and I want to hear more about that community piece. And just for our listeners, who may not be as intimately familiar in the why behind what you do, why is this work so important? And what does it make possible that what wouldn't otherwise be if we weren't having these heroic clinicians stepping up and joining with these young people who have had these life experiences? What's the why here, Candice?
I love this question because the why is multifaceted, but I'll give you the simplest answer to that. It gives these folks, these kids who've experienced the trauma of foster care, which, again, if we just close our eyes and imagine losing everything that we love in a blink.
Right.
And that means friends, schools, teddy bears, siblings, parents, a street, a house, everything that's familiar to you that you lose in a blink. And then not having the opportunity to address any of those wounds because it happens over and over and over and over again.
Yeah.
So having that context is really important to hold. That's what, unfortunately, the foster care system can do to a young person. It can just take them away for often sound reasons. But the impact is the impact. That it takes them away from all that is familiar, all that represents comfort. And in that, it makes it really hard for those kids to access care because they're moving. So they establish a relationship with a safe person, they move. And that might be a teacher, that might be a therapist, that might be a dentist. Anyone, if you can imagine, that's in the constellation of a child's life, can't stick. And so A Home Within's answer to that trauma of having to move, it's giving that kid the foundation for healing. The premise removes away all of those dynamics and provides a stable foundation to begin to change the pace, number one, of healing, because now we're not on a clock. We're not on a fiscal clock, a Medi-Cal clock that says we need treatment plan within 30 days. We're going much at a different pace that gives that child voice and choice and options. So the why is that there are kids in every community in the country who, due to various reasons, have not had one stable person in their life. And so that is what A Home Within is really addressing, is that we have to start with the stability of one caring, responsible, healthy person. And what that does, of course, is it changes the possibilities for that kid, because now, wow, there are people who'll stick around. And so that's really the idea. For some kids, that possibility, that shift might happen in 1 year. It might happen in 6 months. It might happen in 2 years. It might happen in 5, right? Every child is different. Every person is different. But that's the premise. And that's the reason we do what we do.
Amazing. And I am also, what I love about your program, is the support that it provides to young people who are coming out of foster care. And so, in all just full disclosure, I had an experience that was maybe a little bit similar to yours. I had a professional colleague / personal friend say, "Hey, did you hear about this thing called Home Within? And would you be interested in being part of this community and being connected with a young person who is coming out of the foster care system and who really needs support, but who would not have access to it without this program?" And so learned a little bit more about it and what it involved. And I just loved the mission because of just the intention behind it. And that was actually before my husband and I wound up becoming foster parents, which we did a number of years later. And so then just kind of, I think, having a deeper appreciation for what it really means from that perspective, which was huge. But, just, from that experience, for me, being a home within therapist, I was connected with a young man who I think was probably like 19 or 20 at the time, who would have zero access to any kind of services except through maybe a community mental health agency, potentially, but who was really like fairly lost in the world. I mean, it was an adolescent who did not have a family, who did not have access to any of these other support systems because they aged out and just didn't have like an adult in their life to be like, so I was thinking about maybe going back to school. I mean, just like all kinds of stuff, relational things. I mean, you name it. And that was such a powerful experience for me to be able to serve as that kind of person in his life for the season that we were together. And I will also share that this individual wound up moving to a different state in which I was not licensed. And so we weren't able to maintain our relationship. He was able to get care elsewhere after that point. But really for a period of years, that we were together. And I thought many times of just, I think that there are so many different layers of privilege, and some of them are so invisible, but the enormity of privilege, just like to have people in your life, is this privilege that we don't think about. I mean, to have a mom you can call, or to have a soccer coach, that whatever those relationships are, is that not everybody has that. It's like,
Exactly.
yeah.
I always like to say a zip code. The comfort for me of going home.
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm from Pasadena, and it's like, I get all nostalgic.
Yeah.
And then I get upset that everything's changed. But once I'm in Pasadena, the continuity of being in that place and the memories that I have on different streets, the Rose Parade, those are things that really anchor us and tether us to a sense of belonging. And so when you do start going through the layers of loss, it's really profound. And again, A Home Within gives the therapist the opportunity, because there have been so many therapists who grieve. I was working with somebody and then they moved. Or I was working with somebody and their Medi-Cal lapsed, or there was a fiscal, or administrative constraint, and they grieve too. So this gives, both the therapist and the client the opportunity to choose to do the work as long as they decide to do it together.
Yeah, without those limitations. Well, tell us a little bit more about the community experience that therapists have through A Home Within, and what your organization makes possible to support clinicians who are doing this work. Because also, this is a pro bono situation. This is a volunteer gig, right? So tell us a little bit more about the kind of support that A Home Within provides to clinicians who are volunteering for this.
Yeah, I love this question, Lisa. This is part of my, this is the area that I think is so important. I think is self-care in this work, because there's, obviously secondary trauma that can occur when you are observing the trauma of others and you're walking the distance to
Yeah.
be with your clients without those administrative and fiscal constraints. So, a home within provides continuing education to all of our volunteers free of charge. It really provides them, of course, the clinical tools and skills to manage some of the behaviors that might come up and to address them. Again,
Yeah.
over time, because this isn't a necessarily a short-term intervention. And then the consultation groups have been described and experienced by therapists as fundamental to the model because the consultation groups, which are led by experts in the field who've worked with trauma and have a lot of experience holding trauma informed interventions for those who've been in the foster care system. And what they do is hold the therapist so that the therapist can hold the client. And so this has been described as just really essential to the retention and engagement of the therapist in the commitment.
Yeah.
And particularly nourishing to the client, right? Because without those supports and anchors, what we know from other experiences is that folks burn out.
Oh, yeah.
And they can feel really, really overwhelmed by clients not showing up and or by some of the behaviors that they listen to. So the Home Within provides local support, consultation, one-on-ones, and groups to be able to hold therapists in community so that they shoulder the trauma that might be able to, that they may hear and see, but also so that they can cultivate joy in community. There's something that happens when folks get together and talk
Absolutely.
about something that's challenging. Suddenly it's less heavy, it's less burdensome when it's experienced with a group. So those are just a few of the offerings that volunteers receive, and those are the ones we get the most feedback around and appreciation for from our community.
That's wonderful. Well, and I'm so glad that you guys do that. I mean, that's something that we talk about a lot on this show is just how vitally important it is for us to have community, to have people who know you and love you and that can offer you support, because it does take a lot of energy to be the kind of supporters that we need to be for our clients. And also, you know, just to echo what you're saying, like, even because I only had, you know, one client through this program, and he was just dealing with some very big, difficult things that were different than the clients that I usually see. And just to be able to have a place to process some of this and really to know how to be a supportive person, like I can understand why that feels really essential, because it is a unique population with really unique presenting issues many times. And so I just love it that you guys do that. Yeah.
Well, and one other piece that I think is really important is that the therapists get to choose
Yeah.
who they get to work with. And again, therapists in private practice often get to choose who they work with. What makes this slightly different is that if anyone has done any work in community mental health, you don't get to choose.
You don't get to
You
choose.
don't get to choose anything. You get a really tough caseload. And when you're earning your hours, you get a caseload and you don't get to choose. You just get one. I remember when I was collecting my hours, I think I got like 60 cases and it was just like, here you go. And it was like,
Good luck with that.
but they were heavy. And
Yeah.
I can remember my early days in child welfare, transporting kids back and forth to see parents and having really difficult and painful and disappointing outcomes from those visits. And it was really painful. And guess what? I would have to drive like 6 hours back alone, just holding all of the heaviness of that. And so I think also having choice around who you want to work with. So that's part of the matching process. We match our
Mm-hmm.
clients and our therapists in a way that optimizes a really positive outcome for both. And then we
Mm-hmm.
hold both in that
Yeah.
relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Gosh, that's so important. Oh, so I'd also like to talk a little bit more about what you have seen, because, you've been invested in this work for a long time in this organization. And, I think one of the really cool things about getting a little bit older and having the experience is that we can see like the longer term trajectory of things, right? And so I guess I would be curious to hear your perspective of the kinds of trajectories and outcomes you've seen for kids and young people who have not had the benefit of this kind of support versus what the kinds of trajectories and outcomes are and how they can be different for kids who do have the benefit of this one long-term caring relationship that doesn't end.
I can tell you this, it's pretty exciting. So Home Within was founded 30 years ago, as I
Mm-hmm.
said. And with that, there was a research component that was ran
Mm-hmm.
parallel to the founding
That's
of the
cool. I didn't know
organization.
that.
Yes.
Oh,
So
ooh.
Tony Heidemann, our founder, and June Clausen created a partnership with the University of San Francisco's Foster Care Research Group.
Mm-hmm.
And they have done longitudinal studies and looked at our clients. Part of that is to always make sure that our service provision is responding and centered around our
Mm-hmm.
clients' needs and requests.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a pretty good idea based on this long research
Yeah.
history about who our clients are and what their needs are. And anecdotally, working with this population for a couple of decades,
Yeah.
what I've observed out there is that, often kids who don't have access to a consistent, stable adult end up on the streets and or incarcerated.
Yeah.
So, a lot of home folks who are unhoused, in our country, particularly, I'm in California, particularly in California, are
Mm-hmm.
former foster youth.
Yeah, they are.
And so there's a lot of couch surfing. There is a lot of interactions with law enforcement
Mm-hmm.
that often culminate in folks being incarcerated. So it's
Right.
not uncommon for kids who are in the foster care system to end up in the juvenile justice system.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so this is not, again, this is all empirical. You can go research it.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
but and also just professionally, anecdotally, I've observed this working in child welfare and probation systems that kids who are aging out are a particularly vulnerable
Right.
population for all of the reasons we discussed, right? Because they're
Right.
not
Right.
anchored in any particular community,
Mm-hmm.
and the need for belonging is very human.
Yeah.
And so when that need is unmet, a lot of the folks we serve are very depressed
Mm-hmm.
and very anxious. Those are the most prevalent symptoms that we see, coupled
Mm-hmm.
with complex PTSD, which of course occurs when folks have been and experienced several attachment injuries,
Mm-hmm.
physical, emotional, sexual
Mm-hmm.
abuse, and the
Yeah.
critical stages of development. So that's definitely a feature of the population that we see.
Mm-hmm.
The good news is that thanks to the University of San Francisco Foster Care Research Group, we know that our work with these children is meaningful
Mm-hmm.
because we see those symptoms decrease over time. We
Mm-hmm.
see that the clients that we serve are hopeful about therapy. They're hopeful about what therapy can do for them. And that they also, and this is a lot of this is just because we've removed the barriers. they start from the whole premise is different. They don't have to fill out pages and pages to be eligible for our service. One day in foster care means you're eligible. And then, of course, we make sure that the client is appropriate for a private practice model. But that being said, that the premise is different, so they're more hopeful. And what the research has shown us is that those symptoms go down, anxiety and depression. Engagement increases. And part of why it increases, I think, is because of this idea that you can show up at a pace and frequency that feels safe for you. By that, I mean that no showing is normalized in our community. We support therapists to understand that sometimes it takes longer to build safety and engagement and rapport. It can be 3 months. It might be 6 months. It might be 12 months. A lot of us who, have been trained in a lot of these evidence-based practices, which are wonderful, they would have us think that engagement and rapport is about a 4 to 5 week period, which might be true for folks who don't have histories that are significantly marked by trauma, grief, and loss by the hands of a person who was their caregiver, right? So it's particularly significant. So we get our therapists ready for that shift, that it takes often much longer and that it's okay. And that can be hard, right? Because if a client isn't showing up, usually in a private practice, they're incentivized to show up because they get billed for the session, not here. So it, again, changes the pace, and we support the therapist to be able to do that. But again, to your question, Lisa, the difference is we see that our clients have an improvement in their functioning. Anxiety is lessening. They advocate for themselves more because our experience gives them voice and choice, and so that they're able to express what they need, what they want in terms of modality, therapist preferences. And so all of that comes through one single relationship. All of those benefits, just one person connecting with one person for as long as they, and I like to say as long as they both choose, because sometimes people say forever. They translate as long as it takes to forever. I can't do that. And I like to say that really means for as long as the client chooses. That choice is not going to be determined by a fiscal, administrative determination. As long as the client chooses to be in the work, then they have the opportunity available to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and just to be clear to everybody that it's not just kids. I mean, my person I was working with, he, 23, 24, 25-year-old young man, and it's really that like navigating those early stages of life that can really, I think, change the trajectory, like whether or not you go back to school or able to find a job, and then how to stay like in a job can be like another thing. But I'm curious to know, do any of your, the outcome studies, the longitudinal research that you showed, is there an impact on some of the, really adverse outcomes that kids who have been in foster care can experience in terms of homelessness and incarceration? Is there a trend in a more positive direction that you've seen, or is it difficult to know what those outcomes are?
Well, what we've seen is that our population definitely have better outcomes with employment, housing, and when I say housing, I mean relatively stable housing, relatively stable employment, and our incarceration, which is a big risk factor for this population. We're not seeing any of those outcomes with the clients that we serve. Now,
not seeing any of those outcomes.
Right. And
like none of them go to jail.
For there have been a couple clients who
Mm-hmm.
were already on that trajectory. But for the
Okay.
clients
Okay.
who, again, for the clients who were not, um, they do not end up, incarcerated. Um,
Amazing.
so that's one piece. I also want to say for the clients who are on that trajectory, meaning they were in
Mm-hmm.
juvenile justice
Mm-hmm.
and as youth, and then they transitioned into
Yeah.
those institutions as adults. What I think is remarkable is the therapists that we have who still treat them, who
Mm-hmm.
work with him, who
Yeah.
maintain relationship.
Yeah.
Because without those connections, there
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't be any. And so I can think of a
Amazing.
couple of chapters in Chicago that have just continued to do the work, and it's just so inspiring.
So you're saying that a clinician, even if some young person did wind up getting on a path that led them to prison, that they maintained their relationship through that experience to be still that one bridge of connection in an
Exactly.
otherwise very dark space.
Exactly.
That is so beautiful.
I think so. I think that in a nutshell is what, again, I find most
Mm-hmm.
delightful about a home living. Is that we're in a little bit of we've been in a pretty challenging couple of years here
Mm.
where it can feel like the environment is miasmic. You just have to be careful about where you go because there seems to be a lot of attention on what's not going well. And every day I get the opportunity to see people gather around what is
Yeah.
good, gather
Yeah.
around hope, gather
Mm-hmm.
around ideas, and somehow find the energy. I mean, there's a lot to do. Find the
Mm-hmm.
energy to donate, not just their time, but I'm most impacted by their donation of goodwill.
Their love. Let's just call it what it is. It's love.
It's love, it's goodwill, it's
Yeah.
care, it's time
Mm-hmm.
that I find that that's what's most remarkable.
Mm.
And they're doing it. One of my favorite activities is always being on the hunt for joy. And if you're
Mm.
looking for moments of joy and connection,
Yeah.
they're doing it with joy. One of the things that I'm very sensitive about is I never want people to come away from the environment that includes foster care feeling like they're at a funeral. What I
Mm.
want people to feel empowered by is the idea that together, we as humans in community can
Mm.
shoulder lots of things, address them
Yeah.
together. And together we can create an environment of healing and
Mm-hmm.
joy. What I'm most encouraged by with this population, what I'm most struck by is their resilience. I've been working with
Mm-hmm.
my client for a couple of years and I treasure her. I feel like I'm the recipient of a gift every
Yeah.
week after I meet with her.
Mm-hmm.
And it has not been easy. It has not been an easy journey. And in those turns that feel hard and difficult and more challenging for her, what's part and parcel of that is I get to experience the depths of her resilience. The
Mm-hmm.
depths of her pain and sorrow also reveal the depths of her resilience.
Mm-hmm.
And so I come out of those meetings with her that sometimes feel very, very heavy
Yeah.
in awe of her resilience. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's a big piece that I always want to leave.
Yeah.
Not that I'm leaving yet, but any conversation around is that it's really important to hold this population in
Mm-hmm.
the totality of what the
Right.
experience is, which is great suffering and incredible resilience, incredible strength. And that
Mm-hmm.
the intervention I love the most is finding joy and
Yeah.
possibilities. And
Mm-hmm.
this model gives me the time to do it. So two
Yeah.
years and we're just getting started.
Just getting started. Yeah. It's a long game.
Mhm.
What a beautiful idea that really, in the face of great suffering is really what also illuminates this incredible strength and resilience that you don't see otherwise, and that it's felt like such a gift to you. And I love this whole mission, because I agree with you. It's so easy to look around and say like, oh, it's all going to pieces, and there's like, but to really be able to look at it differently, I think that people can get so aggrieved when they see homeless encampments or, like crime statistics, but like new idea that 9 out of 10 of those people were in foster care or maybe should have been like trauma survivors that didn't get the intervention that they need. Like there's a history there, and that, by really being part of the solution and going in with care and love as opposed to, a sort of adversarial kind of mindset, like perhaps that is actually the path to healing all of this. And that for us, especially as therapists, to have this opportunity to engage on a person by person basis. I mean, I know you're probably intimately familiar with that metaphor of the starfish. For any listener who has not heard the starfish story, the kid walking on the beach and all the starfish like coming up onto the beach being washed ashore and the sun is blazing and the starfish are cooking and dying, on the beach. And this little girl runs out and starts throwing the starfish back into the water. And her parent is like, why? What's the point? Just there's too many. But the girl's like, I'm saving this starfish.
Yes.
This one starfish, that to have the opportunity to be that person in this way is such a miracle. And we get the chance to do that in the way that a few other people can't. Like, who else gets to be that person? It's magic.
It really is. And it's needed.
Yeah.
It's like,
it's needed.
This is the time.
Who else is going to?
We have to just, I feel you use the word love, which I think is so obviously important and interesting that it's not used in the work that we do.
Because we don't, like, it would be weird to say love, but that's actually literally what it is.
It literally is. And there is something about, again, doing this work pro bono that allows you to feel that, to leave this session feeling filled with love. And so I think, again, for volunteers we've had volunteers who've been with their clients it's not the norm, but we have volunteers who've been with their clients for 20 years.
Oh, I believe it.
0. And I do believe in just my 2 years with my client that there is a different experience when I leave, and it is love. I feel that I experience is something that is deeply connected to a collective love and reparative experience, where I get to hold that space and that hope for her, that she will be loved because she's inherently worth,
of course,
having everything that her heart wishes for. So there's something about holding that space in this model that you walk away from it feeling filled with hope and love.
Definitely. Well, and that's just so beautiful. I mean, even that, 20-year trajectory, because you know what, if anybody needs reparenting, it is those people. And to have that kind of person who's stepping up to be that, I mean, that's what's going to save the world. Yeah.
I think so. One person at a time.
One person at a time.
Starfish at a time. Yep.
So Candice, this has been just such an inspiring conversation. And if any listeners are like, sign me up for that, where would they learn more? How would they get involved? Give us the deets.
So it's really simple, really easy. homewithin.org. We just updated our website in celebration of our 30th, and it says join everywhere. You click on one of those joins. There's about a 3-minute application. The most important thing that you need to have handy is your license number. But it's really simple. If you're licensed to practice psychotherapy, then you can join us. If you want to join us to provide continuing educations, join us. If you want to join us to lead a consultation group, to hold someone in their process, if you're like, well, I don't know if I can provide a direct service at this point, but maybe a consultation group is up my alley. There's different ways to donate your time. But at homewithin.org, click there and you'll find ways to join us.
That is wonderful. All right. Well, thank you again so much for spending time with me today and telling us about
Pleasure.
yourself and your mission. This was a fun conversation.